Good day. So, this time we will have the continuation of our discussion in the steroid hormones. So, this time we will focus on the sex hormones. So, the functions and the regulations of these hormones by your gonads. So, we have here the sex steroids. We have the testes and the ovaries, which synthesize the sex steroids, the androgens, and of course, the estrogens. And as what we know, they all come from a common precursor, the cholesterol. And the specific hormone secreted by an endocrine gland depends on the presence and, of course, the relative activities of various enzymes in this steroid pathway. So I hope you still remember this steroidogenic pathway. So if the adrenal or adrenal gland synthesizes androgens like this one, the DHEA, or what we call as the dehydroepiandrosterone, and also this one, the DHEAS, the dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate, and of course another one, the androstenedione. So those are synthesized by the adrenal glands. And you have to take note that these hormones synthesized by the adrenal glands are metabolized by the testes. So the ones that I have mentioned, the androstenedione, the DHEA, and the DHEAS. So they are synthesized again by the adrenal glands, but it's the testis that metabolizes these steroids primarily to what hormone? Primarily to testosterone. So once synthesized by the adrenal gland, it's the testis that will metabolize these steroids to testosterone. So that's for the androgens. How about for the estrogens? So it's the ovary. It's the ovary that will convert this testosterone into estradiol and of course into androstenedione to estron. So again, the ovary will convert this testosterone to estradiol and this androstenedione to estrone. So that's just one of the many functions of the ovaries and the testes. And remember, we need the androgens before we can have this estrogen. Now this illustration shows the feedback loop of the regulation of reproduction in male persons. So as what you can see here, the hormone GnRH, or the gonadotropin releasing hormone, that is synthesized from the neuroendocrine cells of the hypothalamus. So this GnRH will bind to specific cell membrane receptors that is located on the anterior pituitary gland. So the GnRH will bind to the specific cell membrane receptors on the gonadotrophs in the anterior pituitary. So now, the stimulation from this GnRH to the anterior pituitary will produce another two protein hormones, and that is the FSH and the LH. So both are named for their effects on female persons. And you have to take note also, because I think you have this discussion in your thyroid function test or your thyroid gland. Both the FSH and LH are similar to thyroid stimulating hormone. So I guess you already know what I'm talking about. So they are similar in their alpha subunits. So all three of them are consist of two subunits. So one alpha and one beta. And all of them share again the same alpha subunit. However, each of them has a different beta subunits. So to make it simple, I have here the TSH, the LH, and also the FSH. As what I have said, they are similar in their alpha subunits. So you have there the alpha subunit of the TSH, LH, and FSH. So that also includes your human chorionic gonadotropin, because this hormone also has a similar alpha subunits to these three hormones also. But again, they differ and they are specific for their beta subunit. So for example, this is the beta subunit of the TSH. This one, this is for the LH. And this one, this is for the FSH. So why am I emphasizing this one? It's because the similarity in alpha subunit structures of these hormones can create some problems in cross-reactivity when immunoassay procedures are employed for quantitation of TSH. So that's why I'm re-emphasizing this one. Okay, so I hope you still remember that one. So going back, so aside from that, aside from the differences in the beta subunit and the similarities in the alpha subunit, you also have to take note that in this feedback loop, you can see here the testis. So the seminiferous tubules of the testis contain cells in various stages of spermatogenesis, right? And also you can see here the Sertoli cells and the Leydig cells. So the Sertoli cells and the Leydig cells. So again, after the GnRH induces the production of these two peptide hormones from the anterior pituitary, what will happen is that these Sertoli cells and Leydig cells of the testis will also be induced. Okay? So, what will happen now is that specifically, this FSH will induce the Sertoli cells to synthesize and secrete androgen binding protein. So that's in the lumen of the seminiferous tubules. So once the FSH stimulates the Sertoli cells to synthesize this androgen binding protein, that will now maintain the high testosterone concentration. And that is required, of course, for normal spermatogenesis. So that's the function of your FSH. It induces the Sertoli cells to produce androgen binding protein in order to maintain the high testosterone content or concentration required for sperm formation. Another peptide hormone is LH. So on the other hand, this luteinizing hormone induces the Leydig cells, okay, to synthesize or to produce testosterone. So take note of the differences. It's the FSH that will induce the Sertoli cells to produce androgen binding proteins, but it's the LH that will induce the Leydig cells to synthesize or to produce testosterone. And what will happen now to the ones produced by these Leydig cells? So this testosterone will be carried, okay, some of them will enter the general circulation and it is carried to the target tissues like your skeletal muscle. And other testosterones are also carried, okay? So again, some of it are carried to the target tissues such as your skeletal muscles, and some of it, okay, basing on the arrow, will be carried to the hypothalamus and also the anterior pituitary. So that now the testosterone will have a negative feedback effect on hypothalamus and anterior pituitary. So what do I mean by that one? So when the testosterone level is sufficient or is already enough in concentration, it will decrease the synthesis and secretion of these hormones, the GnRH, the FSH, and LH. So now, by having that negative feedback, it will now lead to the decrease in the synthesis of testosterone by these Leydig cells. So that's what I'm talking about, the negative feedback of the testosterone. And also, what is indicated in here is this one. So the Sertoli cells synthesizes this one. So the Sertoli cells will produce another hormone, so that is the inhibin. So this inhibin will interact with the gonadotrophs, again located in the anterior pituitary, where it will also produce its negative feedback effect. So that means it will decrease the synthesis and secretion of what hormone? FSH. But not, of course, the LH, because we know the function of the LH. So that's for the regulation of reproduction in male persons. Okay, now this illustration shows us the regulation of reproduction now in female persons. So just like in males, the GnRH is also involved in here. So that's from hypothalamus, and it stimulates the anterior pituitary to increase the synthesis and secretion of both FSH and LH. And unlike in males, you can see here that the illustration is a bit complex because the regulatory process in the female person is cyclic. That's why in females, we have the menstrual cycle. And the changes in the pituitary, in the ovarian also, and the uterus occur during the 28-day menstrual cycle. So in order to understand that one, let's take a look at this one. So based on the illustration, the cycle begins, of course, with the menses, the menstruation. So in this time, you can see that there is a shedding of the uterine endometrium. So the endometrial lining is thin here. And during this period also, if we take a look at the ovary, we can see a group of follicles that is recruited. So we can see here, and they will begin to grow and to develop. And from this group of follicles, only one is usually selected to be the dominant follicle and to continue its growth and development. How about this one, the others that are recruited? So this one will undergo regression or atresia. How about this one? So it will continue to grow, and that's because of the action of what hormone? The follicle stimulating hormone. So this is now the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. And again, that's primarily the result of the action of follicle stimulating hormone. And as the follicles grow, there is also an increasing amounts of what hormone? This estradiol. So as the follicles grow, the estradiol also increases. And once the estradiol is increasing, what can you see in the endometrial lining? Also, the endometrial lining is increasing. It's growing. So that's why you can see a thick endometrial lining in here. And that estradiol has a negative feedback effect on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. Remember earlier, during the follicular phase, the FSH is increasing for the development of this follicle. And as the estradiol increases, the FSH also decreases. That's the negative feedback of the estradiol to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. It causes a decline in the FSH levels on the latter part, on the late stages of the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. Okay? And how about at the end of the follicular phase? You can see here that the estradiol level is already at its highest, right? So what will happen is, it will cause now the surge in the production of another hormones, the GnRH, the FSH, and the LH. So particularly the LH. That's why as the estradiol increases, what you can see here, there is also a surge in the production of LH. And that LH is very important for what stage of ovarian cycle? For ovulation. So the release of eggs from the follicle. So that's because of the action of what hormone again? Of luteinizing hormone. And also, when that happens, there is a disruption of the follicle. So the egg cells are inside of this. So once ovulation happens, there is a disruption of the follicle. And also, when ovulation happens, what is happening now to the estradiol level? So it decreases dramatically. And also, the disruption of this follicle will now begin to, the disrupted follicle will now begin to differentiate into corpus luteum. So that now begins the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. So I hope you can trace back what I'm saying. And what will happen now upon entry to the luteal phase is this corpus luteum will synthesize two hormones, particularly the progesterone, and also, of course, again, the estradiol. So the corpus luteum will synthesize the progesterone and estradiol, and that's still as a result of luteinizing hormone from the ovulation. And the combination of the two steroids, okay, this progesterone and estradiol, will act on the endometrial lining. So the endometrial lining will now develop and it will thicken. Okay? So why do you think this endometrial lining will thicken? Remember, there is ovulation. There is a there is a possibility that pregnancy will occur. So this is in preparation for the implantation if fertilization and early development of fetus will occur. And if it happens, the LH now will gradually decline during the luteal phase. Okay? So that is what is happening in the ovarian cycle. So if the LH declines gradually during the luteal phase, that is already an indication of the restoration of the negative feedback regulation of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary by this estradiol and this progesterone. So by knowing that, we can say that in the event that fertilization occurs and pregnancy will happen, the progesterone level and the estradiol will continue to increase. However, if fertilization does not occur or pregnancy will not happen, this corpus luteum will begin to regress, and that's already at the end of the luteal phase. So take note, this progesterone and estradiol are needed for the maintenance of this endometrium. So that's why they are increased if ever there is fertilization, but they will begin to decrease in the event that fertilization did not happen. And with the drop of this estradiol and progesterone, the negative feedback of this hormone will decrease, and now the FSH and LH will increase to begin another cycle. So there's again another menstruation. Another one that I would want to emphasize is this hormone, the inhibin. So just like in males, the inhibin has a selective negative feedback effect on follicle-stimulating hormone, right? However, in females, there are two different forms of this inhibin. So one is synthesized and secreted by the developing follicle, so this one. So that is the inhibin A. And the other one is synthesized and secreted by the corpus luteum. So that is the inhibin B. Now, to understand it better, I have here a simple illustration of the female reproductive system. So I hope it's clear to you. So this is the uterus and the endometrial lining here. Also this is the fallopian tube. This one also the fallopian tube, and of course, the ovaries. So you have to take note also that the menstrual cycle is under the control of hormones secreted by the pituitary gland and of course the ovaries. And take note also that the pituitary gland itself is under the control of hypothalamus. And as learned from the previous slide, so this one produces the GnRH, this one produces the FSH and also the LH, and also this one produces the estrogen. So the menstrual cycle, so it's a 28-day average cycle. So it's a monthly event that occurs within a woman's body in preparation for the possibility of pregnancy. And each month, an egg is released from an ovary, this one, in a process what we call as ovulation. And at the same time, the lining of the uterus thickens, ready for pregnancy. But if fertilization does not take place, the lining of the uterus is shed in menstrual bleeding and the cycle will start over. And also, what I would want to emphasize is these ovaries, this one, they contain hundreds of thousands of primary oocytes. So that is what we call as the immature eggs or ova. And these immature eggs are enclosed in a structure what we call as the follicle. So this is the follicle. So it's in the ovaries. There are thousands of them. And these follicles enclose the eggs or ova. So that's what I'm talking about. And the hypothalamus, again, produces this GnRH, right? And once this GnRH is produced from the hypothalamus, it will stimulate the anterior pituitary lobe to produce this hormone, the FSH. And what will the FSH do? The FSH will now travel the bloodstream into the ovaries and it will stimulate a group of follicles to grow. So that means these follicles inside the ovary will grow. So from primordial follicle, let me write that one. So from primordial follicle, okay, they will develop into primary and then to secondary follicle. So the primordial follicles, when it develops, it will produce the hormone estrogen. So now this secondary follicle, okay, this one, it will now produce the hormone estrogen. Again, that's in the ovaries. Particularly what type of estrogen? That's the estradiol. And this estradiol, this type of estrogen, what will happen is that it will stimulate the growth of the linings of the endometrium. So this one, it will thicken. So the endometrial lining will thicken, okay, upon the production of estrogen. Okay, just like this one. So the estradiol is increasing in here, so the endometrial lining also thickens. How about those follicles that are not chosen to mature? So the secondary follicles, those that are not given the chance to mature, they will atrophy and die. So that's why I told you earlier that there is only one follicle that is chosen to mature and to develop. And also, the increasing level of estrogen, the estradiol, will act on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland to increase the level of GnRH to induce another hormone, the LH or the luteinizing hormone. And again, a surge in LH secretion triggers ovulation, meaning to say the release of egg from the follicle to the ovary. So this one, so the eggs here will be released. So this follicle will rupture, right? And the egg will be released from the follicle to the ovary. And then the egg is swept up by the fimbriae and it will be taken into the uterine tube. So it will be taken in here. So usually it's in the largest portion of the uterine tube. So that is where the fertilization occur. So fertilization by a spermatozoan, when it occurs, usually it would take place again in a wide section of this fallopian tube, and that is what we call as the ampulla. So again, ovulation will happen and the egg will be released from the follicle to the ovary. It will go to the ampulla and it might be fertilized by a spermatozoan. And the fertilized egg immediately begins the process of development while traveling toward the uterus. So it will travel down to this uterus. So we can now find the embryo here embedded. And now you can see why the lining of the uterus thickens. Okay, that's for, again, if ever the pregnancy happens. And now, once it is implanted into the endometrium, what will happen now to this ruptured follicle? So this ruptured follicle will become a corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum will produce what hormones? So they will produce, again, progesterone and another estrogen, the estradiol. And what are the functions of these two hormones? So this progesterone and estradiol will further stimulate the uterine development, making it a nutritious bed for the embryo in the event of pregnancy. So that means this will thicken to support the growth of the embryo. It's because of the action of progesterone and estradiol. However, in the absence of pregnancy, so once this does not happen, so if fertilization does not occur, then pregnancy will not happen, the corpus luteum will atrophy and the progesterone level will fall. And also the estradiol will fall. So what will happen now? So it leads to the breakdown of the endometrial lining. So that means there is now menstruation that will happen. I hope you understand it well, and that's for the menstrual cycle and the different hormones that are involved in female regulation. So this is the summary of the hormones involved in the regulation of reproduction in female. So the FSH causes an egg to mature in an ovary, and it also stimulates the ovaries to release estrogen. And the estrogen itself encourages uterine lining growth. So the estradiol, to be specific. It also inhibits FSH production to ensure that only one egg matures in a cycle. That's why in the end of the follicular phase, there is a decline in the FSH level. And also the estrogen stimulates the pituitary gland to release the luteinizing hormone. So this one is the one responsible for ovulation. And it's also the estrogen that will inhibit LH after ovulation. So the LH stimulates egg release, okay, from the follicle to ovary. So that's ovulation. And also it stimulates estrogen, particularly estradiol and progesterone production to thicken the lining of the uterus. So this one also speaks about the events that are happening in the monthly cycle of women. Okay, so let us have the specific hormones. So first we have the progesterone. So this one is important in menstrual cycle and in pregnancy. And as what I have discussed earlier, it makes the lining of the uterus thick for implantation, which is necessary to sustain a healthy pregnancy. And you have to take note that the corpus luteum produces the progesterone until the placenta begins to take over progesterone production around 10 weeks of gestation. So again, the progesterone is synthesized or is produced from corpus luteum until the 10th week of pregnancy, wherein the placenta will now be the one to produce this progesterone. And you have to take note also that this corpus luteum is just a temporary endocrine structure, which is of course involved in ovulation and in early pregnancy. And this name, this corpus luteum, it means yellow body in Latin. So yellow body. So this corpus luteum is what is left of the follicle after a woman ovulates, right? So once the follicle ruptures, this will differentiate into corpus luteum producing the progesterone, which is necessary for the endometrial lining growth and development. Now let us have the estrogen. So estrogen is a group of steroid hormones that readily diffuse across the cell membrane, and inside the cell, they interact with estrogen receptors. And we have three kinds of estrogen here. The estradiol, and take note that we have two hydroxyl groups here that are attached to the D ring of the estradiol. And for the estradiol, it's only one hydroxyl group. But the di here refers to the two hydroxyl groups in total. So there is one in the D ring and there is another one in the A ring. That's why it's estradiol. Whereas in estradiol, there are two in the D ring and there is one in the A ring. So that's why it's estradiol. So that's why this is otherwise known as the E3, and this one, this is the E2. Whereas the estrone, there is a ketone group that is attached to the D ring. So this one, this is E1 because there is also another hydroxyl group in the A ring. And take note that this estradiol plays an important role in the regulation of menstrual cycle as discussed earlier. And this estradiol and this estrone, they are of clinical importance during pregnancy. And another one that you have to take note is the E1. So this estrone, it's the only estrogen that is present in any amounts in women after menopause. So that's for estrone or E1. So the estrogen is produced primarily by the developing follicles in the ovaries, also in the corpus luteum and the placenta. But you have to take note that some estrogens are also produced in smaller amounts by other tissues such as the liver, the adrenal glands, and also the breast. But it's the ovaries that are the principal source of circulating estrogen. And you have to take note that in premenopausal women, the main circulating estrogen is the estradiol, the E2. So again, that's in premenopausal. But for postmenopausal women, the principal circulating estrogen is the estrone, which is the E1. Estrogen also plays an essential role in the growth and development of female secondary sexual characteristics. So, it's specifically involved in the onset of puberty, playing a role in the development of these secondary sexual characteristics. So, that includes enlargement of breast and the development of pubic and armpit hair. And although it is considered as a female hormone, estrogen is present in both sexes. So in males, estrogen assists in the maturation of sperm and is important for normal male reproduction. So it's present in both sexes. Now let's have the estradiol. So this is one type of estrogen. So this is already discussed earlier. So it assists in the regulation of FSH and LH, and it plays a role in the development of endometrium. So it thickens the endometrial lining together with another hormone, the progesterone. And the drop or the decrease in the concentration of this estradiol triggers the process of menstruation, meaning to say the endometrial lining will shed off. How about this one? So 60% is attached to albumin, 38% of estradiol is bound to sex hormone binding globulin, and 2 to 3% is unbound. And you have to take note that conjugation is the major form of estradiol inactivation. For estriol and estrone, the estriol and estrone are present in very low concentration in the non-pregnant female, but this one, the estriol production, rises markedly during the course of pregnancy. And what are the effects of estrogen on the female reproductive system? So number one, it stimulates the growth of egg follicle in the ovaries. And number two, it stimulates the growth of vagina. It's like helping in the thickening of vaginal wall, and also it increases the vaginal acidity. Also, in the fallopian tubes, estrogen is responsible for developing a thick muscular wall and for the contractions that transport the egg and sperm cells. Next one, it also stimulates the muscles in the uterus to develop and contract, and contractions help the uterine wall to cast off dead tissue during menstruation and during the delivery of a child and the placenta. And estrogen is also responsible for the growth of the breast during adolescence, the pigmentation of the nipples, and the eventual cessation of the flow of milk. So those are the functions of the estrogen. Now let us have the androgens. So these androgens are a group of hormones that play a role in male traits and reproductive activity. And although these are considered as male hormones, they are present in both males and also in females. And these are the major androgens, the testosterone, androstenedione, and dihydroepiandrosterone. And take note, these are present in female. And much of the growth of the pubic hair and the axillary hair in the female results from the action of these hormones. And also, these are produced by the testes and small amounts in the adrenal cortex. And also, this testosterone, the production of this appears to be cyclic. So the peak of testosterone, usually it occurs at around 7 a.m. and the trough, so the lowest value of testosterone, appears approximately at 8 p.m. And also, only low amounts of androstenedione and dihydroepiandrosterone are synthesized, and both of these steroids have weak biochemical activity. And also, the vast majority of testosterone, approximately greater than 98% of this testosterone, circulates bound to either albumin, so 98% it's bound to albumin, or another one, sex hormone binding globulin. Now, let us have the biological effects of testosterone. So, it's the testes that promotes spermatogenesis and maturation of sperm. And to be specific, the process of spermatozoa formation or spermatogenesis occurs in the seminiferous tubules of the testis. So, I have mentioned this earlier. So, seminiferous tubules. And also, as mentioned earlier, Sertoli cells. So, Sertoli cells or nurse cells, they provide nutrients and also support as the spermatids undergo spermatogenesis. And also this one, this hormone, the FSH, okay, from the anterior pituitary gland, it is necessary for the initiation of spermatogenesis. And also this one, the inhibin. So this is produced from the Sertoli cells. It's inhibiting your FSH. And also, I failed to mention this earlier, that sperm production occurs in the testis, but sperm maturation occurs in the epididymis. So, it's also where the flagella development and the storage of sperm occurs in the epididymis. So, sperm maturation, flagella development, and sperm storage. So for the androgenic effects of testosterone, so in the fetus, this testosterone promotes development of male reproductive tract. So that includes the internal genitalia, the vas deferens, the epididymis, and the external genitalia. So this also has something to do with sex differentiation. And during puberty, the androgenic effect of testosterone promotes the development of primary sexual characteristics such as the enlargement of penis, the scrotum, and the testes, and also the secondary sexual characteristics like the changes in the male body shape, the axillary and pubic hair, and also the deeper pitch of voice of male, and also the thickening of their skin. So those are all because of these androgens. Now, let's have this adrenogenital syndrome. So, this one occurs when there is a tumor in the adrenocortical region that secretes excessive quantities of androgens. So, this tumor now will secrete a lot of male hormones that will cause intense masculinizing effects throughout the body. And if this occurs in female, she will develop virile characteristics. So, there will be a growth of beard, a much deeper voice. Occasionally, there is baldness if ever there's a genetic trait for baldness. There's masculine distribution of hair on the body and the pubis. Also, the growth of clitoris to resemble a penis. Also, a deposition of proteins in the skin. So, the skin will thicken and also it will darken, and especially in the muscles to give typical masculine characteristics. So, this is an example of adrenogenital syndrome in a 4-year-old boy. So there is an enlargement of penis there because of the excessive production of androgens. Also, this one shows a picture of a patient showing virilization. So this is a female person with growth of hair in the axillary region, and also this one, ambiguous genitalia. So there is a clitoris that resembles a penis. Also, this case in China, so this is Chen. So Chen told the doctors he has been married to his wife for 10 years and he has not had trouble performing sexually. So he's a 44-year-old man who visited a hospital in Yongkang, so it's Zhejiang province in China, and he complained of stomach pains and blood in his urine. So because of that, the doctors at the First People's Hospital of Yongkang were stunned after they saw the CT scan results of Chen. And though the doctors removed the benign adrenal tumor causing him abdominal discomfort, a chromosome test confirmed Chen's gender and that the blood was from menstruation. So that means this person who has been married to his wife for 10 years is a female person with adrenogenital syndrome. And also the doctors noted that Chen had no Adam's apple, no facial hair, and he had a deformed penis. And the CT scan revealed the apparent man, surnamed Chen, possesses a uterus and ovaries. So that's one of the pictures of the adrenogenital syndrome. So that ends my discussion. So I hope you learned something. Thank you very much.